Sanford, Florida is usually a quiet Orlando suburb. That is until February 26, 2012. On that rainy night, 17-year-old Trayvon Martin lost his life. George Zimmerman is now charged with second-degree murder, but the jury will also be allowed to consider manslaughter, or they can dismiss all charges. Those are the only three choices. We continue our discussions now with Dee Dee Benke, Dr. Bart Rossi, and Yohuru Williams, a professor at Fairfield University. We thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about what this trial of the century, as it's been called, could possibly do to this country. They are already asking for calm. They are going on national television. Dee Dee, we just touched on that earlier. What can we do to make sure that there's calm now?
Just so sad. I mean, this is when I think President Obama can really be a wonderful president and leader and ask the country to do exactly that. And I think he is a perfect messenger for that. I think that because he had stockiness early on. He made comments about it, even said, hey, this could be my son. We'll see what happens, but I really think he could take a nice leadership role in this, and hopefully it'll make a difference.
What are your thoughts?
I don't think that this is a trial of the century for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're so early in the century. And more importantly, I think that people are looking at this as a barometer on race wrongly, in the sense that we're looking back at maybe the Rodney King riots of 1992 and saying this is a similar situation. It's not. That was a case of official misconduct by the Los Angeles Police Department. You're talking about very different communities. So I think the expectation that there's going to be any violence is a little bit overstated. I understand why people are trying to make that case and looking at this as a polarizing case, but I think the potential for violence in this particular instance is far less than what we would see. And also, if you consider the last 30 years, 40 years, the two major racial conflagrations we've had in the aftermath of cases like this, Miami Overton 1981, Rodney King 1992, those aren't very many. That's two. So again, the idea that this would somehow lead to violence, I think, is troubling.
And I agree with that. I actually agree with that. But yet, I can't take away that there are law enforcement communities across the country that are preparing for possible demonstrations. So I agree that there shouldn't be any kind of demonstrations. I agree that we haven't seen any. But but should there be? I mean, should there be demonstrations if he is found not guilty?
Well, I think it's interesting, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, Bart, because I think it's the psychology of this moment and where we are as a society. This whole gun culture, for example. I mean, what the prosecutor said in his closing argument about George Zimmerman and the idea that he charged into that situation armed with his gun and his fear is partly what's driving this conversation about what will happen and what will blacks do if there is a not guilty verdict in this case. I think what you'll find is a situation very similar to what happened in the aftermath of the OJ case, where what this will become is a moratorium for certain segments of the population on what's wrong with the judicial system, what's wrong with the gun culture, so on and so forth. But the idea that there'll be violence, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, and I agree. Nobody is really talking about the lenient gun laws in Florida. And that's what, you need virtually you need very little instruction to carry a weapon down there. So I'm surprised that hasn't come out. Dr. Rossi, any thoughts?
Well, I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment, but I think things have gone too far in Florida. I think it's overstated in terms of violence. I don't think there's going to be violence, but I do think that this is a striking case about behavior. And what Zimmerman really did was profile a kid, and then that kid ended up being dead because of his own profiling.
Now, that's your opinion.
That's my opinion, yeah. I think he profiled him, and I think his words and profanity prove that, actually, and I think that's going to lead the jurors in a certain direction.
What about some of these cop helpers, if you will, cop wannabes they're called sometimes? Some people say they don't receive enough training as well, and they're given a certain amount of power.
Well, he took a course, and the course basically said, see and call, don't follow. So this whole thing about the legal aspects of the case and being not guilty, I think is trumped by his behavior and actions. I really do.
All right, I got Dee Dee shaking her head there.
What do you mean profile? You don't know that. I mean, you don't even know what he was doing. I mean, nobody does. I mean, he could have been looking like he was going to do something wrong. He could have acted violent, could have acted strange, could act on drugs. We don't know that. So for you to say just profiled him, it's unfair.
Well,
I don't think that's right. Plus, I'm glad that you've got people that want to have community action, and people can carry guns, and people can protect their community. I mean, we don't know what happened here, but don't just assume that was the case.
I'm not assuming. His language was clear. He used profanity very explicitly,
so
and I think that's a comment.
Well, I disagree. I don't think that makes any difference.
Let me ask another question. Do you think that Americans are in denial about racial profiling? And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Rossi.
I don't think they understand it. I mean, I think racial profiling, there's nothing wrong with profiling.
Let me say profiling, not just racial, but profiling in general.
Yeah, I don't think they really understand it, because profiling is okay if you're looking for terrorists and if you think they're Italians or blacks or something and you have reason to believe that, then profiling might have some real good legal implications. However, profiling when you stop black people because they're driving black,
he stopped him.
That's something
we don't
else.
know.
You know?
He stopped him because he's up to no good, whether he's black or white
There's no
or Asian.
evidence.
Nobody knew.
Let me get back to the
But there's no
initial
evidence here.
question.
There's no evidence here
You're
that this
right.
kid was doing anything wrong.
Or
Let me
against.
let me get back to the question. Are Americans in denial about racial profiling?
Americans are in denial about race. And the problem in this case is that Americans refuse to confront. Attorney Eric Holder in 2009 memorably said that we're a nation of cowards because of our inability to talk concretely about race. And I think what this case indicates is the level to which that polarizes our legal system, prevents us from having conversations that will allow us to look at a situation like this for all the reasons that Dr. Rossi talked about, and to identify that clearly what happened here is a tragedy, not only because we have the death of a 17-year-old boy, but because we have a nation that won't admit that people are profiled because of their race. And that in this particular case, it went horribly wrong and George Zimmerman killed a 17-year-old, and he probably will walk because the evidence doesn't support a second-degree murder charge. But if we don't have the conversation about race, then this is a lost opportunity.
I think it's tragic that we're turning into something about race, really, because we don't know that, and to say that, and that, again, that's why it's better safe than sorry. That's why, you know, we're talking about possibly having violence. Let's hope we don't. But I think it's sad that it's come to that. You know, we really shouldn't assume that.
Well, if we talk about what happened, though, nobody was there. There's no witnesses.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a very hard case to try. And I'll even go into, to convict of second-degree murder, you have to prove that Zimmerman had a depraved mind with regard to human life. That's very hard for them to prove right now, which is why I think a lot of people agree that it's going to probably come down to manslaughter. What are your thoughts?
I think manslaughter would have been a much better place for the prosecutor to aim. Passion, fear, or rage, one could make the case that he was, in this instant, driven by his fear, didn't have a reasonable opportunity to reflect and acted accordingly. But let's be clear, if George Zimmerman doesn't have that gun, maybe we're looking at the case of State versus Trayvon Martin for assault, and there isn't a dead 17-year-old. The gun conversation in this entire discussion can't get lost, and it seems to be lost in now the conversations about race. That's part and parcel of this as well.
I absolutely agree with you on that. I don't understand where the discussion on guns hasn't come into this.
It should be, but I also like to say that Zimmerman called 47 or 48 times in the past few years about suspects. They were all black.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all black. I mean, how could that be?
Well, you know, I just think it's unfair. You don't know what happened, so just to assume
47
that, and that's
times?
the reason. Well,
It's pretty clear.
and it's a stand your ground law. It's a different state, so you know he could still be acquitted. Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Rossi, where does that psychology come from in terms of in terms of possible profiling?
I think a guy like Zimmerman has certain thoughts, certain sides to his personality makeup. I think he is a wannabe cop, and I think that he projected himself out there as somebody who was a wannabe cop in that situation, and he profiled that kid, and he did some things that were completely opposed to what he was trained to do, which is to see and call. He went way beyond the line, and that's why I think the jurors are going to act on that.
Well, they did say that the dispatcher actually told him not to follow him. So
Don't do
was,
that. Right.
Exactly. So that is one of the arguments for the prosecution. So.
Which is another reason I think that you can't make the case here of official misconduct. If you look at the actions of the police now in retrospect, the time that it took for them to investigate this case indicates that they were trying to be very careful in evaluating the evidence. And so again, it's not like an instance where we're seeing the police have done something and the community responds because they believe that this is official. This is the actions of one individual, and they've let the legal process play out. And in this instance, it looks like the law will sustain George Zimmerman. It doesn't mean that people won't be upset about it or won't want to change the law or look at how to make the system better and operate better, more effectively.
Well, I've been calling this the trial of the century because we are only 13 years into it and there haven't been a lot of trials, so I'm going to go back to that. But as with anything, any major event, any trial like this, what lessons can we take from this? Dee Dee, I'm going to start with you.
You know, I just think we have to realize that and let the judicial system work, and to be very conscientious of that. And we're always innocent until proven guilty. And there's no proof here. So you may hate him, you may not like him, you may think he's a racist, but it doesn't mean he killed anyone in the wrong way. It doesn't mean it wasn't self-defense. You don't know if he wasn't beating up on him. You don't know if he was about to take him out. We just don't know what happened. So I just like it that in America that we're innocent until proven guilty.
Final thoughts?
I think we clearly need to have a national dialogue about race, about our criminal justice system and how it operates. We need to look concretely at the issue of guns. This is not just a question of what happened with Trayvon Martin, but we look at the Newtown shooting and other high-profile shootings in the last year that indicate that we're a culture that seems to be polarized by our inability to talk about these very difficult issues. And I think if there's a takeaway from this, it's that we need to address these more systematically in our everyday walk.
Fair enough. And Dr. Rossi?
I think the prosecutor, John Guy, got it right at the end when he said you should look into the heart of the victim and the defendant. And that is more important sometimes than all of the specificity associated with the law. The law is the law, but sometimes it entails more than just the specifics. And in this case, I think the jurors are going to look at his behavior.
Well, we thank you all for your insights. Very interesting. Appreciate it all. And we ask you to stick around, everybody. We'll be right back. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about another hot button issue, and that's going to be client number 9. Of course, that's Elliot Spitzer.